Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. Today I am absolutely delighted to not give you not just one Toby, but two. Toby Corballis, how you doing?
Hey, I'm well. How you doing, Toby?
Really good, thanks. Really good. The two Tobys, the two Ronnies, it's got all sorts of permutations, this, and maybe we make it a regular thing. We'll wait and see. Toby, look, listen, thanks so much for joining us today. I've known you for a long time across the capital market space. You've got a long track record of multiple areas of consulting you've done, and most recently started StoryPositive, which sounds fantastic and couldn't probably be better timed with everything that you add to it about the new age of technology and everything that's happening in the digital world at the moment, particularly around capital markets. But not to steal your thunder, please give us a little bit of intro about what you're doing and the StoryPositive story.
So StoryPositive was set up basically in February last year. And the whole ethos of the organization is that there's a lot of negativity when people think about new technologies and new ways of working. And I'm thinking particularly of things like public cloud and agile ways of working. And they're very good bedfellows, by the way. We'll come on to that maybe in a bit. But how there's a lot of negativity about that. And actually, if you get it right, the story is positive, right? That comes out of that. And what you get out of that is the ability to really respond to change rapidly and to pivot where necessary and do it quickly and be able to respond not just to market events but also to client demands, which obviously themselves change very quickly with rapidly changing markets.
And I think that's, as we say, it couldn't be better timed at the moment because this was a pre-COVID launch and you saw this as an issue already. And I think if we look through last year, people were posturing and talking about all of this sort of stuff. And, we saw a huge growth in the agile marketplace. We saw, increasing adoption to both that and cloud, as you say. But there was still a little bit of, the reins being pulled back by the traditionalists and the conservatives amongst everyone who were just not quite ready to give everything. This has been called the sort of fuel on the fire of digital innovation over the last 6 months. Tell us a little bit about what you've seen there and why it becomes StoryPositive. And I love the name, by the way, because I think it's the whole theme of this Fintech Focus TV series that we've been doing is to say that there are positives that can come out of this, and negative news fills every sort of space, but particularly in this capital markets technology space, I think there's so much good stuff that can come out of it and is. And if I look at one sector that I think has been really robust through this is it. But the StoryPositive piece about seeing this sort of and this last 6 months helping you and your message sort of improve a little bit. Tell us a little bit about that side.
So I think you're right. I think in the sense of there's a lot of we respond negatively. I mean, we all love negative news in a sense. That's what drives a lot of newspaper sales and so on. That's why they're negative. And actually, we crave positive results, and we all want our businesses to do well. And balancing that dichotomy is quite important. That there are always going to be people who are resistant to change. I mean, it's just a fact of life. But actually, change is a very good thing. It's been with us since the very beginning, and I do mean the beginning, like the Big Bang. Change is the only constant, as Heraclitus said, and it's true, right? And the fact is that the rate of change has been accelerating. And if you read a lot of Chris Skinner's stuff, you'll see he mentions this a lot, right? Yeah. And you have to be able to respond to that change. And it used to be that you could respond quite slowly because change was quite slow and we all had these monolithic systems and we just did what we did and that was fine. But, along came cloud really came along in the kind of 90s, but it wasn't called cloud until the noughties. And it's matured hugely. And what we have now is this sort of bricolage type functionality where we can just pick and choose the things that we need, slot them together, rearrange that quickly, and make it immensely secure. I mean, there's a lot of talk that people come up with sometimes about how cloud isn't secure. Absolute tosh. It's very, very secure, more secure than most legacy systems, right? And then you've got this sort of agile ways of working, which is a really powerful way of working when you have problems that need to be addressed continually, and there's change happening within those continually. So if you've got systems requirements that are coming up, that are changing because the market's changing, client demand is changing, that's happening rapidly, as we've seen with COVID, you've got the ways of working in the whole agile side of it. You've got the cloud and the whole technology side of it. You can really, bring those together in a sensible way. If you can do that, you will get a very positive outcome. And StoryPositive is about positive outcomes, right, for the clients. And that's, I just think it's critical. And I mentioned pivot there. It's that sort of, in agile, it's called fail fast, right? And it doesn't mean fail. It means recognize that the direction that you're going in may not be the right one. Recognize that early, pivot, move to something that's more aligned, and measure, continually measure, to make sure that you're going in the right direction.
That pivot word is one that's sort of caused mass derision at various stages, and suddenly has become on trend. So if you look at the last year, I think people would talk about pivoting and saying, look, if you pivoted, it means you haven't had the right strategy in the first place. Right now, we're looking at pivoting as being a sort of genuine success strategy. You've been in the camp where it's probably been that all the way through, right? Tell us a little bit about your take on the big pivot debate.
Well, I've been in both sides of the story, and in fact, I'm guilty of years ago believing that you shouldn't pivot. I've come away from that perspective, and I think it's a really good thing now. And I think one of the best stories of pivoting that I've ever come across, whether you like or don't like Twitter is a pivot story, right? Because Twitter was originally set up to be a podcast listings platform, and iTunes came along, and the guys at Twitter went, oh, that's going to completely kill us. What can we do? And they had an internal system that they used, which was 146, whatever, the characters. And they used that to communicate, and they just thought, well, let's see if we can turn this into a product. So that's what they did. So they pivoted away.
That story.
Yeah, they pivoted away from what they'd done, and and that became the success. And you could say, well, if you have to pivot, you didn't get your strategy right. But as Nicholas Taleb says, black swan events happen, right? Yeah. And you can predict some, but you can't predict others. And therefore, you can't necessarily have the right strategy all the time, years in advance. I don't know what's going to happen in 5 years' time. What I do know is that, in fact, the further into the future I look, the more opaque is what I can see, right? Yeah. So I'm more likely to be able to predict what's going to happen in 3 months, and even then probably not, than I am about what's going to happen in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10. So I need to have, if you think about it, what I really need is a strategy that allows me to respond to those changes as they come in. And that's where I think if you have that flexibility, both in the technology and in the way you work, that you can really keep those positive outcomes coming steadily.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key parts of this. You talk about 5 year predictions and strategies around that. If anything that we've been taught over the last 5 months is it's almost impossible to predict 5 weeks, let alone 5 months at the moment. I think we spoke before this and said, look, if you had thrown the net back 6 months ago and said, when I remember when we were, evacuating the building for the final time here, and I thought, right, this will be an extended Christmas sort of break from it, and we'll probably be back in 3 weeks. And 5 months later, 6 months later, none of our clients are back in, and people are slowly starting to edge back into the city at the moment. And speaking now, second week of September, you're slowly starting to see it fill up a little bit, but it's still far from normal. And that's sort of, that's the world we live in at the moment. And for the foreseeable, I think we'll be seeing, a very similar sort of piece. So this whole thing of long-term strategy making becomes almost impossible, right? It becomes as, worth of the paper it's written on. So how do people get that right? And with so much volatility and uncertainty, and literally, chief economists, some of the best economists in the world are sat there with sort of pinned down on a donkey sort of scenario at the moment. Why does this become even more important to have this sort of agile change-based and transformative strategies so robust in your business right now?
Because I think if you don't, one of the scenarios I was thinking about before COVID, right, was that if you didn't get this right now, because you've got large players who are starting to get this right. They've been tinkering at the edges for a while. Now they're getting it right. I'm talking about people like Goldman Sachs. I'm talking about people like Citi, JP Morgan. Those people, they have a lot of resource that they can put into this, which is great, and if they're getting it right now and you're waiting in the wings and just going to watch the market and see how it goes, you probably haven't got 5 years. Now, I thought that with pre-COVID, I think you probably haven't got 3 years now, because the rate of change is accelerating. I mean, it's been accelerating for a long time, as we said earlier, but it's really, I think that rate of change is going to accelerate far faster, and you're going to have a lot more to deal with, because when COVID happened, don't forget, people broke all sorts of corporate norms and rules, right? I'm thinking about things like, they suddenly had to get a load of people laptops that they didn't have necessarily. They had to get those. They had to maybe break some corporate policies around allowing them to be on home networks, which maybe not allowed.
It's almost unheard of before, isn't it?
Yeah. So all of these things have to be addressed, because if you don't, what's the security profile of that? Just as one example, then if people are now used to working in, like we're on Zoom now, if people like Zoom, Teams, whatever it is, do they really just go straight back to working in an office? We've got blue team, green team type scenarios that are going on, where you've got half the team in 1 week, half the team in the next week, with the rest working remotely. People aren't traveling by air. There's all sorts of different ways that people are working. That's driving, because don't forget also that my staff are somebody else's client, and your client are somebody else's staff, and all this. So actually that drives client demand as well, and client ways of new interpretations of how they want their products to be, right? So if you can't keep up with that demand, I don't think you've got the luxury of saying, I'm going to wait 8 years or 5 years and just see how it all goes, and I'm going to come in as I think it's I can't remember who it is, but the guy that did the sort of bell curve, where you've got the laggards at one end, and then you've got the early adopters at the other. Well, you don't necessarily want to be one of the very first early adopters, but you don't equally want to be in the laggards, and the time horizon across that bell curve is shortening, in my view. And so it's really important to start thinking about and acting on now how you're going to get that strategy right for being able to pivot and possibly pivot frequently. I talk about, I've got a book out, but I talk about in that, not the new normal, but a series of next normals, because we don't know which way this is going to go. And who knows what's going to happen? Are we going to have another lockdown nationwide? Hopefully not. But what about local lockdowns, and how's that going to affect businesses? And so we need to be able to respond to those, and those things have further repercussions. You only have to look at the distribution, the volatility of fixed income over the last, or derivatives, during COVID, to see it's had an impact, right?
Yeah.
And if firms can't react to that impact, then where are they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned the book, Digital Leadership Delivered, I believe, and available on all, I imagine, Amazon.
It's not on Amazon yet. It's on Leanpub.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So we can find it there, and soon to be best-selling in all airports, I imagine, as well.
Absolutely. I can't imagine anybody would go on holiday without a copy. Then I can't imagine many people going on holiday.
Not yet. So we've talked a little bit about all of your thoughts. You sort of poured it into this sort of manifesto in the book at the moment. What prompted that, and what are some of the key messages to come through from it?
So what prompted that is, if you look at the literature around cloud technology, and you look at the literature around agile ways of working, there's an awful lot directed at practitioners, right? So the guy who's actually the Scrum Master, if they're using Scrum, or the guy who's doing the project management in some other variant, or the guy who's the database engineer or the architect or whatever. There's a lot of books and a lot of literature on that. Very, very little that is aimed at people in management, in leadership positions, or who want to be in those positions, who are thinking about these things and wondering whether they're right. What tends to happen is those people tend to get their information from consultants, some of whom will be absolutely on the button and giving them the right information, but that isn't guaranteed, and sometimes they're not giving them the right information for various reasons, some of which I do go into in the book. But and what I felt was that was missing. There's a lacuna in that literature. So I thought I'd have a go at plugging the gap. Right? I mean, who am I? But there you go. I did. And so the book goes into, without trying to get too technical about anything, and it's trying to keep the concepts at a level that is relevant to leadership, right? Because it's not relevant to go into the minutiae of the technology. People don't need to know that when they're running a business, right? They're busy people. They've got limited time for reading a book, or but they need to be able to digest some of those concepts, and I think it's really important. To give you one example, people often will say, security of cloud, it's not secure. Absolute nonsense, right? It's as secure. Obviously, if you don't make it secure, it's not secure, right?
Yeah.
But you can make it more secure than most legacy systems that I've ever come across. And then people talk about, well, we've tried Agile and it didn't work for us, wasn't for us. Well, maybe that's because you didn't actually do it the right way. Sometimes what people do is they send somebody off on a Scrum Master course, and then they expect that that's going to make the entire organization agile. They forget to do the bit for leadership, because it changes the way that the leadership interact with their own people. And that's
hearts and minds from the top first, isn't it? Surely. Yeah.
Top down all the time. Yeah. If it's not bought into at the higher levels, then it's not going to get implemented at the lower levels. And that's true of all change, really. So I thought I'd put together something that explained it all, and hopefully I've covered everything but not gone into too much detail.
Give them enough to call you to come in and be the cavalry. I like the style. Listen, you've touched on an interesting point there as well, because look, some of the issue, in fact, probably a lot of the issue around the sort of, I guess, laggard nature of capital markets in transformation as a whole has been down to that word legacy. And there's big legacy systems, and the market, or the scene, is still probably dominated by some of those big enterprise players within the capital markets trading technology space. With what we're seeing at the moment, and that appetite for digital evolution, there's still this big lumbering problem of huge cost to take out systems, and then all the security that's therein, with stuff that probably is pulling back the industry at the same sort of stage. But we're seeing an awful lot of innovation, an awful lot of agile companies. Your position, I imagine, and I'm putting words into your mouth here, is to come in there and showcase to these organizations how they can utilize this new technology to fight against the sort of sluggish legacy systems that have come through there. Or is it, conversely, to work with the big legacy systems to help them evolve as well?
More the former. I mean, I think it's great when legacy organizations transform, and I think it's a necessary thing, and we all probably know the story of Kodak and how that fell apart, because they could see the market falling away from them, but they were still milking the cow that was feeding them, and they didn't want to give it up, right? And that can happen all too often. But look, there are right ways to do this and wrong ways to do this, and if you've got a legacy system but you've still got lots of years left on it, and it's not costing you that much, and it's not actually doing anything too onerous, well, maybe you should keep that actually for the moment. That's I'm not saying change everything and do it all now. I'm saying change your mindset and your approach, And in the course of doing that, evaluate what's right to change now and work now to do it. Don't leave it. And one of the points I make in the book is that, and I think this is a really serious point, by the way, because we talk about capital markets, we talk about a lot of organizations as being very conservative in their outlook, and that because they're conservative, they're risk averse.
Mm.
And I think, I spend a little bit of time talking about this and exploring it, because risk aversion, in my view, is actually a form of risk creation. And the reason for that is, if I stand still, right, and the water's rising around me, but I don't want to move because I'm frightened that if I reach out and grab the branch will break, I will in fact drown at some point as the water comes up above me. And so that's creating a risk. Now, it might be that you have to assess the risk on each side and say, actually, I'm better off just standing here because I don't think it's going to go above a certain level and somebody will come and rescue me. Or it might be that you can see that the water's coming up too fast and you do have to grab that branch and you have to pull yourself out. And if you don't go for it, then you are definitely a goner. And if you do go for it, you may not be. So maybe that's not a great analogy, but the point is that I'm trying to make is that you can create risk by standing still.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when people say they're risk averse, I think it behoves them well to just take a moment of reflection and think to oneself, when I say that, am I creating risk or am I actually reducing risk? And sometimes the answer is that you are creating risk. And that's what I want to help people visualize, understand, and then work through to get a positive outcome, as I said.
You've had a sort of stellar track record all the way through the industry for a long time now, and seen various different sort of forms from small company to large, etc., and added value to all sorts of businesses all the way through. Who are you focusing in on at the moment? Who are the people who you think you can really help through this and add considerable value to right now?
I think really it's I don't like to classify that much as tier 1, tier 2, etc. But it's a sort of tier 2. But I think a lot of the tier 1 guys are actually getting comfortable with this. But if they're not, I'm happy to come and help you out. But yeah, and I think a lot of the sort of fintech startups, when they're in their initial startup phase, my experience has been that they are actually quite agile. They're quite open to using the cloud, etc., etc. And then they tend to, it's the sort of, I think it's Greiner's model of corporate development, where you have these different crises of leadership as the corporation expands. And it's really at that second tier where you've gone, we've been nimble, there's only 3 of us, we can do a lot. And then suddenly there's 30 of you. And then the bureaucracy starts setting in, and the different ways of thinking come in. And by the way, different ways of thinking are great. But what you want to make sure is you don't fall into traps like groupthink about old ways of working and old legacy systems because somebody saw it work 20 years ago or is afraid to take the plunge. So I like to work with startups that are not necessarily in their very first phase, but are getting to that point where they've actually they need some structure, but they also need to understand how to remain nimble. And I also like to work with those sort of banks and so on, or exchanges who want to become more nimble, want to be able to respond to change, but don't know how to do it and want to be able to get their heads around it. But it's no fault of their own in either situation. You don't know what you don't know. You're constrained by the knowledge you have, and that's why people like me come in and help you out.
I think that's really interesting, isn't it? In particular, that sort of scale phase, because look, on big principles, there's a lot of press around that at the moment. Jeff Bezos and the day one thinking sort of mentality he puts into all of his annual reports. Reed Hastings has got a book out tomorrow as well, and I think there's been quite a lot of press around that. It's going to be the two books are probably, yours and his are going to be vying for the top of the top of the business chart. Yeah, exactly. But there was an interesting piece I read in the Times this weekend actually, where he said, right, they had in 2001 there were about 120 people. They brought it down to 80 and kept and were probably more productive than when there were 120 people, and that was he said his road to Damascus sort of moment. Fast forward on, 18 odd years, and they're an 8,000 person organisation that probably could be a 15,000 person organisation. He's kept those sort of lessons tight from that as well. That's a big part of what people are talking about, isn't it? Maintaining that sort of not just culture, but the sort of the thinking and thought as they go from that and it is difficult. I've been in there for the sort of 30 to 50 is probably the most difficult part of any business, I think, as you grow and contract.
It really is. It really is, and it can form structural logics within the organisation that persist, right? For decades, even after people have gone. It's the old, if you have one gorilla in a cage or several gorillas in a cage, so you put a banana up there, the gorilla goes up, you hose it down. I know it's not a real experiment that happened, but it's a great thought experiment, right?
And it's then incredible video, that, isn't it?
Yeah, and then over time you introduce more gorillas and you take gorillas out until none of the original gorillas there, but none of them will go near the banana. And that's it's a good metaphor for how these sort of, and you said the word actually, which I think is a magic word, culture, how the culture of organizations can develop and persist even when some of the original people that created that culture are no longer there. And in some sense, I always say the technology, right, that's the easy bit, right? If I want someone to build a database for me, I can just go out and hire somebody in, but I can tell them sort of what I want of the database. I don't need to know anything about how databases work. They're going to build it for me if they're an expert. That's kind of the easy bit. I can get that person off the show. I might have to pay for them, but I can get them. The difficult bit is the culture, right? And again, it's that whole we talked about earlier. It's got to be somebody at the top saying, this has got to change. I'm bought into it. I'm going to walk and talk this, as is my leadership team. We're all going to buy into this. And they've all got to buy into it, by the way. And we've got to go on that journey. And you won't always get everyone buying in, by the way. And there's a great book by John Cotter and Holger Rathgeber, who wrote Our Iceberg is Melting, and another book called That's Not the Way We Do It Here, which are really worth reading on the cultural side of things. So you won't get everybody on the journey, but it is really important. And that doesn't necessarily matter, by the way. And when I say that, that's not me saying, and everybody who doesn't, you'll have to fire. That's not it at all. But you do need to get that buy-in from the top, and you do need to make sure that the people at every layer are also brought into the journey, and that cultural piece is the difficult piece. And that's forms a lot of the focus of my work, actually.
So when you sit there and say that that you don't have to, as you say, fire everyone and get rid of them, but there are people there who are actively resistant to the change that you're talking about. I'm sure you've read Matthew Syed's most recent book, Rebel Thinking, which talks a lot about all the things you've been speaking about here as well, and the power of diverse thought and such like. Tell me a little bit about how you see that improving and how you manage that as someone who's driving change and as you say, look, this is the perfect time for agile and cloud to coexist, and there is that sort of pull. What's the right way to deal with that?
There is no one right way. Okay, so you will have some. First of all, you need to understand why people are resistant to it, right? So there'll be lots of different reasons. Sometimes people are afraid that means that we're going to change, we're going to do things differently. It means my job's going to go. I'm going to be resistant to it because I've got a self-interest in maintaining the balance of things as it is. A great example of that is that you often, if you're introducing cloud technology, for example, you talk about infrastructure as code, right? So suddenly you dematerialize the infrastructure. It doesn't exist as a thing. So the technicians who would go into the data center for you, who would rack up all your stuff, make sure the structured cabling's in place, all of that stuff, cage it, whatever, go and service it every now and again, make sure the disks are, everything's working. But they get terrified that they may not have a job. But actually, they're still important people because infrastructure as code, it means that they're changing the way they implement things, because they have to learn how to do that infrastructure as code, perhaps. So, and once they do that, very often my experience has been that they actually get very on board with the technology, because suddenly they don't have to keep catching the train out to somewhere a long way away to go and service a disk drive and then come back, and their day can be more efficient and productive for them, and they can do a lot more. And the sort of the immutability of infrastructure as code, by which I mean the ability to make sure that it's all exactly as you want it, that it's all as secure, you can roll out policies to make sure things are secure and safe and all the rest of it. Once they get their heads around that and they understand how to do it, very often they're on board with that, and they become the champions of it. So understanding why people are resistant is really important. Understanding what you can do to help break down that resistance and inculcate in them a feeling of positivity, that's really important. Very occasionally you'll get people who just don't want to, for them it's a cognitive dissonance maybe. Now actually, when you talk about changing an organization, sometimes you're gonna have to run the old with the new, right? But you might have a contractual reason why you don't want to get out of a certain part of what you're doing, doesn't make financial sense, whatever it is. Those things are still going to have to run. So actually some of those people that don't want to change can be allowed not to change, right? But it's a question of making sure that they're doing what they need to be doing, or what they should be doing, or what's valuable to the company, whilst also not prohibiting what you need to go forward into the new world, because that stuff will burn down over time, but that time might be 10 years, right? As I said before, if you've got a mainframe process that's just firing off reports every now and again, but it's going to be expensive to shut it down, you might want to leave it running, but you're still going to need people to service that, right?
Yeah. So
you can use some of those people who don't want to change to do that, if they're happy to do that, and you can bring other people on the change journey who are happy to go on the change journey. In terms of how do you make sure that you have a good momentum going, it's about often, you break down change into those people who are resistant, those people who are your champions, your helpers, and those people who are your fence sitters, people who sort of don't really care. They just want to do a day job, and they want to do it well, but they don't mind if it's, they couldn't, maybe they're entering data stuff, entering data on a screen, and that data, they couldn't care if what the machine is behind that, but sometimes, or sometimes people just want to come in and do some, whatever work it is. Anyway, the point being that they're the people you really want to persuade, right? Because they will help you build the momentum.
Yeah.
And so that's another aspect of it.
And then when they become champions, even more so, it becomes the draw that they have with them becomes even greater, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think there's a really fascinating piece there about momentum, isn't there? Momentum is one of my favourite words in business, full stop, and I do it from my love of sport, and I see just these massive swings in momentum. In tennis, you see it all the time. In football, rugby, any sort of sport, you see momentum being this great shift of just what the impact it has very demonstrably on everyone on the pitch, and how their mentality just changes straight away from it. And it's exactly the same in business. You see forward momentum in terms of a successful sales month. You see forward momentum in terms of a project or a change process sort of happening, and that the exact same thing works in reverse as well, right? And it's really important to keep and build that momentum with the right sort of process to allow it to happen. It absolutely is. And in fact, one of the things you should do is celebrate your wins, right? Yeah. Constantly. So you're going to have successes on the journey. Keep celebrating them, because everyone loves success. Yeah. Right? And if you show people the success and you showcase it and you celebrate, and I don't mean, the opening of an envelope, but if you genuine successes, right, celebrate them, because actually it demonstrates and it shows that you're moving in the right direction, that you're going to get stuff done. Yeah. And that the change is working, and that's also important, because otherwise, if you don't, what happens is people go, "Oh, well, it's not working. I haven't seen anything." Yeah,
right?
I think that change is working is something I'm just writing down, scribbling a note there as well. It's sometimes I think in business we can be bad at celebrating forward momentum and just be concentrating on the next thing as well. And those sort of landmark areas I think are so important to get right. I'm realising that we've been talking for ages. I knew we would do with all of this, and it's gone by as probably suggested like that. And as a man, as I said beforehand to you, that now has your Wicked Problems podcast. You know how quickly these things go within that as well. And that's going well, by the way.
It is. Yeah, always keen to, if anybody's trying to solve one of the world's more pernicious problems, always keen to hear from them. But yeah, it's going very well.
As well.
Yeah.
So listen, you've got the consultancy work, you've got the book, you've got the podcast. Who should be reaching out to? Who should be talking to? We've spoken about these growing startups. We've been hearing about the sort of tier 2s or tier 1s if they're ready for it as well. But there's so much value that I think you can add to people at the moment. Who do you really want to be helping right now?
Well, I mean, those people that I talked about, people who genuinely perceive that they have a problem, they want to get it resolved or solved, or they want to look at it in a fresh light.
Yeah.
Basically, 3 sets of problems. That you've got critical problems that have to be solved now. When people left for COVID, that was a very good example. Haven't got time to plan to get everyone laptops, or how the best way to do that is just get them, buy them, let them buy them, whatever. That's the first type problem. Second type, tame problems you've seen before, you know how to solve, or somebody you know knows how to solve it. And then wicked problems. And wicked problems tend to have several characteristics. And one of them is, they don't have a stopping condition. And that's very true in business, right? Very often people think about, I'm going to have a change project. Change project's going to take me a year, then it'll be done and we can all move on to something else. But actually, product development isn't like that, right? And the world isn't like that. The world changes constantly, over and over again. Heraclitus again, change is the only constant, excuse me. And it's really people with those wicked problems who maybe don't understand how to deal with problems or change that is constant, that is happening over and over and over, product development cycles that need to be, they don't come to an end, One day they will, but they don't come to an end in 6 months or a year. There's no finite time on those things. And inculcating that into the culture of the organization, I think, is really important. So those are the sorts of people I love working with. Now, obviously, there's limited capacity here in the company, but those, network of 18 people, we all work together. But there's, again, I come back to that sort of stage 2 startups, maybe stage 3, the medium-sized bank. Those are the ones I love working with, because those are the people that really, they need that help more than the Goldman Sachs of the world. They've got people in place to do that generally. They've got the resources. They may do it in a way that maybe I wouldn't do it in that way. That doesn't matter, because they're doing it in their way. So it's more that sort of medium and smaller organization.
They should definitely reach out. What's the best way of reaching you?
Via my website, which is StoryPositive.com, or via email. If I say the email here, will I get spammed to death?
I can't promise it.
I never put it on the website because it's always a contact form for that reason. But it's tc@StoryPositive.com. So that would be perfect.
Well, let's hope for not spam, but loads of useful content that comes back for you as well. And look, I love what you're talking about here at the moment. And just as a byproduct, if I'm looking at where's been the busiest area over the last 6 weeks or so, product has been something that's just gone up like that. And product management has been probably the buzz requirement that's been coming through our desk over the last weeks. And I think that's probably no surprise with everything you've just been speaking about.
No surprise at all. No.
Yeah. No. Well, listen, Toby, it has been an absolute pleasure. I'm so pleased we managed to catch up and hear everything about Story Positive. I wish you nothing but the utter success with everything, and the best with all of it going further forward. Plus the book, I shall be looking forward to dipping it into myself and get a signed picture with it as well at some sort of stage, I'm sure.
Excellent. And I'm sure the BBC will be in touch about the Two Tobys show.
It's only a matter of time. Toby Corballis, absolute pleasure. To everyone else who's been watching, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.